Hello and welcome to this Independence Day special story talkie. Then we have one of the esteemed guests with us, someone who has been in education sector for almost half a century, if not more, and someone who has been keeping a keen eye on the India progress story. He is an economist and he heads a very renowned education society in Calcutta, Bhawanipur Education Society, where he is looking after the education of the children, from children to the young freshers who are going to be in the market. Welcome, Dr. Suman Mukherjee. It's a pleasure having you here.
Pleasure for me too, to discuss on education.
So unlike everywhere, every time in the story talk is when we focus on marketing and communication, today we will be talking about education, edutech, and the impact that it is bringing in shaping New India. So my first question to you would be, since you have been in the sector for close to half a century, how have you seen education panning out in India, and is it on the right track?
See, I have been not only in India, I've been abroad, and so I'll try to sort of bring an amalgam between what I've seen in India, in West Bengal, what has happened in Delhi, how is it with the top echelons in India. Well, let me begin by saying when I was young, I was in a public school. And at that time, education was a process of producing a gentleman. In ancient India, it was a process of esoteric learning, mystical learning, getting to know about yourself. But then we moved over to creating personalities for the commercial sector, because then immediately after independence, the commercial world was active and alive. So most of the schools and colleges and school were more bothered about creating executives for commercial use. Maybe a flare of that continued in Delhi too, because after the schooling in a hill school in Darjeeling, I came to Calcutta, where education was given a lot of stress those days. And then later I moved over to Delhi in one of the top Christian colleges. It's called the Mission College, Stephens, where too it was very elitist, because the people wearing the star, it says, never had a problem of seeking a job. And then I moved on to Delhi School of Economics, where the best teachers were from Calcutta, actually, whether it was Dr. Amartya Sen, Manmohan Singh, Nagvi, Nagar. We had even professors from abroad, James Mead and Joan Robinson. They all came to teach us. But it was for a purpose of creating the best standards of education. And I believe D School at that time was rated the third best institute in the world. So that's one journey of education where you're trying to put in the best quality in. But my agony was most of the students, my batch friends, were actually seeking this like a Dundee salt, triple filtered, topping in schools, going into top colleges, then making yourself job worthy. Many of them ran into the tea industry, commercial sector, opted for IS. But the moot question is, why did you have to take a seat in a specialized line like economics and not pursue it? Very few actually pursued that. The ones who did left the country to do a PhD or go into World Bank or IMF and joined multinational consulting firms. Apart from these few exceptions, very few actually gave back to the country what they had specialized in. This was a question that troubled me till in the course of my journey when I came back to Calcutta in St. Xavier's College, and then I moved on to XLRI, a leading management institute. I faced the proposition of meeting students from IIT. And my question to them at the interview was, if I was a selector on the other side of the table, I wouldn't select you, because there's no doubt about excellence. There's no doubt about your competence. But what I find is your choice is scatterbrained. If you've done civil engineering or mechanical engineering, why are you coming to do an MBA in XLRI to get a job in Hindustan Lever to sell soap? Somewhere something is going wrong. I mean, there is a question because people ought to know whether it's engineering or management or graduation. The exchequer pays more than what your parents pay to make you what you are. This debt that you have to the nation, which means the poor farmers paying taxes to make you what you are, is not recognized by most students. They think my parents paid for my education, and therefore I have a right to flee and go wherever I get a greener pasture. Where my career goes, what I do with myself, whoever pays me more, whichever country offers me more, I go now. That is where I think we need to plug the holes, because we need to know that there is a question of give and take. You wouldn't find this happening in other countries. You wouldn't be finding people giving up their country and settling down here only for lucre and money. You would be doing it for the country.
Why are students are so disoriented? They study something and then they pursue something else, and then they go out to actually build a career for themselves,
Yes.
but not for the
Um,
country.
Students up for a certain career and then move on to something else, which is a waste of exchequer's money. It's a waste of time and talent. And that's a question that needs to be addressed. Because after all, getting a seat at IIT or XLRI is very difficult. So once you get these, you're actually denying others from pursuing what they could have actually chased as a dream. So in order to get into a management institute, it should be sufficient to be having a BCom degree. You don't need an engineering degree. And in fact, the engineers can have their own schools of management, like you have VGSOM, or in Delhi or in MIT, you have the Sloan School. So you can train your engineers to be managers. But if you have a few B schools and IMs, and you're actually making it difficult for people to seek admission there, then the best will always move from one place to another. The problem is not just that of money and waste of talent. It's also the question of a goodness of fit. There are two things that need to be matched. Me as a person, what am I? One needs to understand that. And that organization, what am I going to work for? In management, we have two theories. One is we judge performance by profitability. But the public sector was not set up for profits. It was set up for productivity. So the balance of their organization actually depends on what is the amount of employment I generate, what is the number of people I cater to, how am I responsible for society, which is why today we have views like corporate social responsibility, which ought to be actually the government's duty, but we are making it mandatory for companies to contribute a part of their profit. So something somewhere is going wrong. And then if I have ethical standards, I will find myself difficult to work in a tobacco producing company or a liquor company. Now, and then I'll be looking at where am I doing and what am I doing? Because once you have a cancer death because of tobacco, there'll be a clash of thinking between what you want to be and what you're really doing. Now, for this, we need a different kind of training. For instance, I'll start with a very simple example. At the school level, you should be asking, just before a person passes a school, a child should be given a piece of paper to see 5 years from now, where do you want to be and why? After the person has read that out, and they're normally lost because they're looking at the glamour of the company, the flowers at the background of his office, and and the designation and the office and the structure, whether it's a multinational, whether it has a social status, whether people at the club really recognize this as a good place. But we have seen so many companies go down the drain. The second question that you ought to do is take that sheet of paper and say, 10 years from now, what are you doing? And it can't be that if I can be the first, could be that I'm going to be the prime minister of the country. But the second question would actually put into his perspective, how do you see yourself after 10 years? Then take that sheet away and ask the third question, 15 years from now, what are you doing? Mention a day in your life. So from health to your thought, to your work, to engagement, and the need to professionalize all falls into place. Where we go wrong is we try to use the social calendar to find ourselves, and develop ourselves to see how can we reach out to society at large, whether it's Facebook or Instagram. We are trying to reach out because communication is extremely important, exchange of ideas. A very interesting thing that they asked in the MBA schools in UK is, can you draw your family tree? So you have a social network that you is given to you, but for family reasons, maybe clash of business interests, split between cousins, uh, debates between internal feuds within the family, you've lost a part of the branch. And the next generation is not able to integrate with people who are culturally and whose moorings are more or less alike to you. So you have your own tree, but you don't know it. And you're groping in the dark, trying to communicate with people because every man needs to communicate. So communication is such an important part in our lives, which we don't realize. And therefore, communication is actually coming to terms with yourself. If I look at it in a different perspective, there are 3 stages of education. First is blossoming. At the blossoming stage, you don't dye it with colors like tuition, because you've already told the person to depend on a crutch. So it's not getting 90% in all subjects that make you bright. Yes, intelligence is a very part of it. But what are your comparative advantages? What are the things you like to do? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be a professor? Do you want to be a lecturer? Do you want to be a social worker? Or do you just want to do your business? Recognizing yourself in a mirror is something we don't teach. Our idea of excellence is IQ. How intelligent are you? How much of marks did you score? Do you really need that kind of algebra, that kind of trigonometry, if you're going to be a lawyer later in life, or to be a politician in life, or to be, it's earlier we didn't have problem solving. So we made life difficult by taxing your brain and asking you to think differently. But that became rote learning. People who couldn't cope up with it went in for tutorials. And to make our jobs easier, most of the universities started forming a question bank, which is, I think, sacrilege. It's one of the big no-nos. There is a disconnect between what's happening in the world today and what you know in your textbooks. For instance, in management, we are always, unless you're in a top B school, we are about always 4 years behind. How many textbooks would actually, or the courses would actually make you up to date with what has happened during the Modi regime? What are the plus points? What are the minus points? That's not in their course. So you're not even aware of what you need to know, where your country stands when you face an interview. And what is presented to you is a mark sheet where they show you're excellent in thinking, perhaps on being able to rote and retch out in an exam. But does that reflect your ability to integrate with what is happening in society, what's happening in the world, what is really good about society? So your communication ends because you are a frog in a whale. Now, this is where I think education needs to be different. Let me go on to the next point. Human consciousness, that has 3 levels. Thought. As I said, we started with esoteric learning. Then we moved on to producing a gentleman, to be critical for a good job. Then came the balance wheel of society. Start thinking about the poor, the needy. Today, everything has been swept under the carpets because you need to be technologically crafty. You need to be driven by IT. At each stage, we have looked at dividing society. Elitism, mysticism, then elitism. Then let's start thinking about people. Then let's be technologically savvy. But the question of self-recognition has been lost. The second part of human consciousness is, how do I emote? Emotional quotient. how effective is it with me to understand society? Literature, geography, history is downright underplayed, as if it's not important. But that's where your social values come in, your moorings come in, your pride comes in, feeling for one another comes in. So you've forgotten not only scriptures, moral values, even reading literature and thought. Shakespeare is no longer needed, nor is Rabindranath, nor is Premchand. Now that's a loss for society because the emotional quotient is actually being underplayed. What is being overplayed is the third part, which is your evaluative and analytical aspects. How good are you in maths? We've moved from educational curriculum to skill development. We forget that there is something called educare, caring, feeling, concern, responsibility, loyalty, returning to the country that I belong. We are, after all, born in a country where we got to live and die. This is built on the ashes of our forefathers and ancestors. The temples and the places of worships are consecrated here. You have to live in this country and die for this country. Where is this sense of patriotism being taught in our educational institutes?
One thing that India is, and not just India, the entire world is now looking forward to is edutech, the education technology, which is bringing education to the farthest corner. Like people who don't have access to global education, for example, they're able to study, are able to access, as you said, that when you were studying in St. Stephen's, you had grades like Amartya Sen and others coming and teaching. Now, our students in the remotest corner don't have such privilege. But with the edutech coming in, they have access to a wide variety of learning. How do you see this actually as an advantage, and where is it that the opportunity for us lies?
30 years ago, UGC INSAT program was started and where I did about 18 programs. So I think that is an excellent model where we use the television to reach out to students. And perhaps you could have the best of lecturers lecturing in a certain place, like you're interviewing me on different subjects, have a hour's talk, and then telecast it right over the country at that time, so that that knowledge is available with city dwellers as well as rural areas. The digital divide has to be, any kind of dualism, cultural dualism, technological dualism, or financial dualism has to be done away with. Fortunately, technology has reduced the costs, and you can reach the best of faculty to the remotest corner with just use of a laptop, a smartphone, or a television set. Now, that amount of investment each state government should do. And you should be having larger playgrounds for people to perform and develop their physical strength, because television can help you on your intellectual ways, and the courses must be at various levels: analytical, emotional, thought, explain people how they can research. You have enough in Chat GPT and other kind of formats for them to research. You don't need a teacher, you need a guide. The teachers can be just a catalyst, integrating global knowledge with national knowledge at the cerebral level. But then comes a question of focus. If my country is basically rural and agrarian, and I have more people living in fields, I need to bring in knowledge of how can they commercialize their sectors, how can they increase their earning capacities. If I am a small scale producer, I need to link them up with international markets on supply chain management, on process development. I would say it's a model of global ancillarization. You need not produce a product. You can produce a process of that product. Let's say Bangladesh is stitching a label. I am doing the textiles. Pakistan is doing the packaging. You create a commonwealth. Everybody has a share in that interest. You'll bring in global peace. We have to interlink industry with agriculture. Industry must make sense to agriculture. There's huge opportunities: electricity generation, packaging, transportation, hospitalization, hospitality, service industries. Who does not need whatever? So once you allow this kind of technology to reach out to everyone, you're making sense. It should be a part of your organic system. It should not be an exclusive part given to some who use it for their purpose. Artificial intelligence must be a part of medical development today. I'm told Google has discovered, uh, just by x-raying your eyes, you can discover whether you're facing a heart attack. Now, that will do away with CT scan and MRI. Great. But try to think about this artificial intelligence reaching rural India. If you're making that person move from a rural area to Mumbai or Bangalore or Calcutta, that's a cost for him. So we'll have to now disintegrate possibilities through technology to see the same technology gives you awareness and skills at every place, and everything is available everywhere.
So you brought in Chat GPT and the artificial intelligence and the way we are creating the opportunities. How do you also see this as also a handicap in a way that our dependence on these technologies, especially for the students, because now they can actually go and ask ChatGPT to actually write their papers, research papers. The thesis can be written there. So, how do you see this also a sort of a burden or sort of a disadvantage if the tool is not used rightly?
As I said, either the World Bank or the international bodies or our own NGOs or the government must spend to see that this technology is available in the remotest corner. So you need electricity, you need wavelengths. Even in our talk, we had weak with bandwidths. So you cannot allow that to happen in a country where you're actually trying to move in with technology. And this must be even in hilly areas and even in where there's a storm, because you just can't have no news anymore in a certain part. The second part is, in a country we have very, very many dialects, dialogues, and languages. So immediately, the Chinese theories must have translations in Tamil, in Malayalam, in Bengali, because it depends on how you're reading that knowledge. So if you're going to force someone to read only Hindi or English, you're also creating a divide, because he's been brought up in a mooring which is different. Technology has not even discovered the importance of translation of every script into the language that is discernible to it. That is a huge opportunity. And so the first is networking, reaching out whatever I'm saying centrally and selectively to every place, so that there's a basic LCM of knowledge everywhere. And then for the higher echelons of knowledge, research, R&D, I must have translation transcripts for me to understand that and put it in my language. So if I can put it in Japanese and get it translated in English, or in German and get it translated in English, why can't it happen in India? So that's going to be a very important challenge that we could look into. Otherwise, you're actually saying language comes before communication, which is not the issue. The main issue is learn, internalize, and express. So for this, language should not be a barrier. That's where the challenge of technology is. So one is catching up with whatever is happening internationally, regionally, digitally. The other is being able to communicate. So when you refer to communication, if my mother tongue is good, unfortunately for me, it is not, because I've been brought up in English medium school. So when I want to communicate in Bengali, to our Bengali brethren, I can't because I find myself lacking in vocabulary. IT can help me there. I can write my script in English and that can be translated to Bengali so I can reach to the masses with my thoughts. Now, this is another point that IT has not looked into. So I think there are many challenges. We have started the journey. There's a long way to go. And even when it comes to merging, let's say, health sciences, Ayurveda, Unani, surgical, antibiotics, allopathy, there needs to be an amalgam as alternative parts, which A, can be affordable, two, effective. There's no point downplaying a certain theory which has lived for centuries to say, I have arrived at a better way. Then these parallel sciences would not be there. There's need for comparative studies and alternative ways because you don't know what system will suit whom. So that is the challenge that I see for IT.
Yeah.
And that's the way IT is the growth for future.
Yeah. And finally, sir, since we are in the market economy, as we talk about, it is everything is geared towards market and how we are growing and what we can do. One of the major problems that I see of people who are coming into market every day is their ability to communicate, and this happens irrespective of where they come from. We have top in the universities creating talent which can communicate to a particular community. As you said, the social media is somewhere where people are more comfortable, but in general, when you're communicating, say a marketer has to communicate the value proposition of the product to the last person in the line, right? Is there, and with all the exposure that we have, we are generally talking to machines, we are generally talking to through via media on a screen. How do we talk to humans? How do I make my university grads comfortable with a human connection or with human communication?
You've touched on the most important point. There's no point in calling ourselves educated if we can't communicate. Now, communication can be in any language. The question is the art of communication has to be taught. And that can't come by just listening to a motivational speaker. That can come from certain technologies and certain training that needs to be done. When I was in school, we were taught by the Belgian fathers on the art of debating. The beauty about debating is to take in a civil manner a difference of opinion, which is the heart cornerstone of a democracy. So debating must be encouraged because there's always another point of view. And we do it in a civil way. That's the heartstone of debating. But the question is, when you go onto a stage, when you're facing an audience, you get tongue-tied. So what are the physical exercises you could do to help yourself? One is, we were told by, let's say, Father Kennedy, swallow an imaginary banana. So when I swallow it, I clear my throat. And if I'm tense, then I get choked and I can't speak. I can't think clearly. The second is I get jaded. I go with a sheet of paper and try to read from it because my thought process does not come as fluidly as I can if I've really thought out my issues. So I don't need a script of paper. It should be internalized. But why can't I emote it? Because I'm trying to recite somebody else's writing. I'm trying to memorize it. I've not internalized it. And second is I tend to forget because I get nervous. So there are breathing exercises that I need to do, like breathe in oxygen heavily, and oxygen will rush to your mind so you don't get choked when you're trying to speak. You don't fuse. You don't get stuck with a point and say, and I was saying, and so I was saying. It means the person has got stuck somewhere. Thinking has stopped. You must remember, communication is speaking your mind to somebody else. So when you talk to yourself, internalize, it's a form of meditation. Why should you hesitate to express yourself freely to others? So you need to internalize your thought and you need to express your thought. Third comes the art of speaking. A standard form of speaking, other than two other points, is to make yourself attractive. You start with an example. For instance, if you're talking about a general topic, start with something which is personal and then go into a general and end with a bang so that people remember what you said. The other is the approach should be TTT. Tell them what you're trying to tell them what you have to tell them, and tell them what you've told them. So there's no confusion about what you want to say and what you've said. So these techniques ought to be taught, and this has to be drilled in. If you don't make a person stand up on a stage and emote his thoughts to the others, you're actually crippling him. That's where I see a cripple. So communication is what keeps life together. It's they saying, can you have a water without a river flow? The current is communication. That's the first step of knowledge. Second is presence of mind. Immediately, you should be able to refute a point of view or think about an alternative to the point of view, because there are always two ways of looking at something, the dark side of the moon. And be civil about it. Don't get agitated about it. And the third is you must introspect, meditate, and without that, you don't get to know what kind of a person you are and what you want to say. Reflect, and no one is a better teacher than your own conscience. So once you are able to do that, awake your consciousness, you will be a communicator, you will be a trainer, you will be a teacher. And when you share values which has made life important for others, you will be a preacher. These are different stages of communication.
Thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure listening to you, a pleasure getting such a varied perspective right from the ancient eras where you said mysticism is where we started, and today in the technology era where we're trying to find our moorings, as you say, in being a global being as well as a communicator. So thanks a lot, sir, for giving us your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Namaste.
Namaste.
Yes.
And for our viewers, please stay tuned. We'll be coming back with more days.